This is Your Own Best Company, a podcast for people who love to work alone. All right, this is a fun special edition of Your Own Best Company in that I've allowed two people to come. And you're familiar with both of them if you've been paying attention to this podcast at all. Erica Holthausen and Audrey Holst. Yeah, I got the, your names both begin with H.
I know. I'd actually never heard of our names said together like that. I was like, oh, interesting.
We have to go all the way to the fourth letter before we can get alphabetical with you. That's
I love it.
Fun. But we are here to talk about some interesting things that have come up just in the last couple of days. One was Erica and I were at an online mixer last night, and a discussion formed around the idea of thought leadership. And it was fascinating. It was interesting, intriguing, and all of the above. And we're kind of adding to that the idea of what an influencer is. We've got fodder for an hour at least, I think. So, but I'll have each of you just briefly introduce yourself. Audrey, you start.
Sure. My name is Audrey Holst. I am the founder of Fortitude and Flow and the Perfectionist Archetypes. And I work with high performers and high achievers to orient away from toxic perfectionism, to get out of pre-burnout, and to actually enjoy and relax into the lives they've been working so hard towards. And this is going to be an interesting discussion. I'm excited to dive in.
Me too. How about it, Erica?
Yeah, so my name's Erica Holthausen. I am the founder of Catchline Communications, and I help experts, especially consultants and business coaches, learn how to write, pitch, and publish articles in industry trade journals and business magazines so they can get their real, deep, meaningful ideas out into the world.
They've both been guests on the podcast before, and the reason that they're back is because they were two of my favorite guests. And our conversations went wild places, and they were fun, and they were energized and exciting. So we are here to bring more of that forward.
No pressure.
To fill everybody in on what the discussion was about last night, we were just having a real brief discussion about thought leadership. And it was an interesting set of takes on this particular subject. Now, Erica, I'm going to pick on you again because you did such a good job of opening the can of worms last night. Tell us a little bit about this thing.
Yeah, it's a can of worms I like to open.
All right.
Yeah, because I think the term thought leadership has lost a lot of its punch. And a lot of people will say, oh, I am a thought leader. And you don't get to say that. This is an honorific that is bestowed upon you. It is not something that you get to claim. It's sort of like claiming, guru or any of those other phrases that really you can't say that about yourself. It is not up to you to decide if you are a thought leader. Other people have to bestow that upon you. So I've always struggled with that term from that perspective. But then historically, if you look at true thought leaders, they are often ostracized. Their careers can be railroaded because humans, we're not so great at change. And if you shake up your industry in a very meaningful way, people are not going to like it. And that can really actually harm you, not help you. And the other piece is a lot of true thought leaders are not remembered. So I had brought up last night Steve Jobs because that's a name everybody knows. But how many people know Edwin Land? He was the inspiration for Steve Jobs. He was the founder of Polaroid. And Steve Jobs actually talks about how much Edwin Land inspired him in terms of how he did everything in his business. So you have the person who truly was the thought leader who's not really remembered that much, but Steve Jobs is. And too often the thinking part, thought leader requires you to actually think. Mm-hmm. And we look for shortcuts. And so it has created a term that doesn't mean as much as it used to do. And I would much rather have folks focus on how can I be helpful? How can I make an impact? How can I think deeply and share my ideas with an audience that is really going to be helped by those ideas? Then I want to be a thought leader, because I don't really care if you want to be a thought leader. That's not relevant to me.
Yes, I am now the world's spiritual teacher, and I want everybody to follow me now.
Right. Self-declared, I am amazing. And it's like, well, high five for you. Here's your blue ribbon, go away.
In other words, everybody run.
Yeah, exactly.
As fast as you can in the opposite direction. Well, I really appreciate the way that you frame that, because it does give some understanding to a little bit of, to the definition of what thought leadership is and what a thought leader is. I remember when I first started hearing that terminology, kind of scratching my head and wondering just how in the world anyone, first of all, could come up with such a term. And secondly, how could anyone actually be that and maintain it for any length of time?
Yeah, we know the origin of the term. Erica, is that something that you know?
Yeah.
Do we know the first usage of this term?
So the first use of the term thought leader was in 1887. And it didn't really take hold until 100 years later. But the 1887, it was a book written by Lyman Abbott about his predecessor, Henry Ward Beecher, who was the brother of Harriet Beecher Stowe, the author of Uncle Tom's Cabin. So, and this was somebody else writing about Henry Ward Beecher and referring to him as a thought leader. This was after his death, and that was the first time it ever showed up. Fast forward 100 years later, and it was Joel Kurtzman, who was the editor of Strategy and Business magazine, who started to profile people in the business world, and he basically referred to them as thought leaders. And if this is helpful, here's his definition of a thought leader. A thought leader is recognized by peers, customers, and industry experts as someone who deeply understands the business they are in, the needs of their customers, and the broader marketplace in which they operate. They have distinctly original ideas, unique points of view, and new insights. That's a high bar.
Yeah, and it's nowhere near self-bestowed.
Right.
It's actually part of the definition, is not self-bestowed.
Yeah, exactly. That other people recognize you as this. And one of the secondary problems or challenges I have with it is that is a high bar. Unique points of view, new insights, distinctly original ideas.
Yeah, it is a very high bar.
That doesn't happen that often if you're using those words in the true meaning of those words. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean that you can't have an impact, because if you say something that people have maybe heard hundreds of times before, but you say it in a different way, within a different context, within a different framework, that can suddenly make a huge impact and change how somebody operates in their business, operates in their life, all of those things.
Well, given that definition, does anyone come to mind that's a contemporary?
So here's the person who comes to mind because she really was a thought leader. So Dr. Suzanne Simard, and her career was almost destroyed from her thought leadership. So that's also typically what happens is folks who are true thought leaders, who have original ideas, do get clobbered. And she was one of her articles was on the cover of the 1997 issue of Nature magazine. And the magazine had written a cover blurb, as they usually do, that talked about the wood wide web. So not worldwide, wood wide. So her article was all about those, I can never pronounce this word, mycorrhizal networks, fungal networks.
The fungal networks, yep.
Yeah. And they share resources between trees. They do all of that. And this article initially met a whole bunch of acclaim. And then she got slammed because that fundamentally challenged the forestry industry and how they were growing and what they were doing. And, clear cuts, it basically says clear cuts actually don't help you. They hurt you. And suddenly it was sort of like, oh gosh, well, if people start thinking that trees are sentient, like maybe we're not going to be able to cut them down as much. So there was a huge backlash, and it resulted in, her own mental health taking a hit, her own huge amounts of self-doubt, her own career taking a hit. So that's my cautionary tale, but that's also somebody who comes to mind. And I think we often don't hear about true thought leaders because they get ostracized and ridiculed by their industry and silenced.
She really challenged the status quo and all of the accepted lore of the current, state of things. That's also kind of a feature, it seems, very often anyway. Yeah.
Well, and that goes right back to the definition. If you're going to have new ideas, new insights, if you're going to really have all of that stuff new, you're going to piss some people off.
Yes.
I would expect so. Kind of like Audrey.
I was just thinking that, Kristen, but I wasn't going to say it.
It's funny. I've been chewing on this a little bit. So I wasn't at the event that Franklin and Erica were at last night. So although it's a lovely event and I encourage everybody to attend it, I was actually at a different event where they were talking about open spaces. They were talking about this unconference thing, and which is a completely different way of running a gathering. And it is based on, and this is my very, very rudimentary understanding, because people spend a lot of time studying these things, and I am literally just brand new to it. But so my beginner's mind understanding of this is it's a co-created space. It's a collaborative space that is non-hierarchical, where people come together and create an agile framework that people can jump in and out of. One of the tenets is you have mobility. So if something is boring you or you don't like something, you leave and you go somewhere else. And, having groups, like you could end up in a room by yourself and maybe you just journal there.
Yeah.
Right. You explore your own ideas. So it's a very different, extremely different way of thinking about bringing a gathering of people together, where it's not like these people are running it and these people are paying for it, and there's a certain way of how we interact with each other. So that was one of the pieces I was just thinking about. Groundbreaking. Groundbreaking was the word that I wrote down when you were talking about thought leadership. There's some aspect of groundbreaking to that. And then I'm starting to think about just the term groundbreaking, that it's literally breaking something, digging into something that exists. And maybe you dig up what you want, maybe you don't dig up what you want, but you're going to discover something, and that is probably going to piss people off.
Yeah.
So,
because we buried all of that stuff. For a reason,
that's when you start digging up the bodies
over there.
Yeah, exactly. All of a sudden you're digging up the bodies and you're going, wait a minute.
Yeah.
What are all these bodies doing over here? The other thing that occurs to me is, thought leadership at its core. And actually the thing that I was thinking about when we started talking about groundbreaking, I was actually thinking about the art of drag, which we can talk about in a second if we want or don't have to, but that was the first thing that was coming to mind randomly. And it seems that for me, a true thought leader is not just ideas, but I think that there's also a certain, in my perception at least, and Erica, you probably maybe have some more insight on this, or Franklin, there's a certain embodiment of these ideas, and there's a certain maturity and experimentation. And I don't think that these are people who just throw out an idea that they just thought of off the top of their head today and just toss it into the water. It seems like this is something that they've been sitting with and have a certain maturity in themselves in expressing these, 100%. Again, ideas. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And I love this idea of these open spaces, because the other thing is, a real thought leader Like, newsflash, they did not come up with this shit on their own.
Right.
It is a collaborative process.
Mhm.
Suzanne Simard, she was a PhD candidate. She was working with lots of other scientists in doing this. Steve Jobs working with lots of other people. You don't come up with this stuff in a vacuum. So this idea of these open spaces where you can come and learn from another and from each other and hear things, like, I had not heard anything about open spaces until Audrey brought it up. And all of a sudden, all of these connections start happening.
Mhm.
And that's the meaningful stuff. That's what matters. That's what brings value to interactions. That's what helps you as a business person bring value to your clients. Like, and that's the fun stuff. Like that, yeah, that's just where all of the good, juicy, fun, amazing things happen.
Yeah.
Okay. So something I'm going to jump in. Franklin, I want to hear from you, but I got excited. So I'm going to jump in if you don't mind.
Go right.
We got Eric and I who are like the.
Can we do Kermit the Frog Arms?
A true thought leader is not looking for exclusivity. It's actually the opposite. And I think, just like Erica, there is some risk in, if you, first of all, I think thought leadership, like you said, has lost its, people will talk about thought leadership as creating content, right? That's been referred to, people tell me like, okay, what's your thought leader? You need to produce thought leadership. And to me, that's just another way of saying a particular type of content that expresses your unique point of view, right? That's okay, fine. But I think when we're really talking about a thought leader as a person, this is not somebody who is looking to hold on to the exclusivity of their idea that's theirs and they're going to hoard it. This is somebody who is saying, hey, I am expressing this because of the possibility that this creates for others. This is an outward facing thing. This is not a me hoarding resources. This is not a me, trying to puff up my ego. This is me saying, I've had this discovery that I think is going to serve others and I want to put that out into the world. So now.
So this was my heart pounding because I was like, yes.
Yeah, there's a collective benefit, I think, to the real thought leadership. The thought leader is the first person to, or the first group of people to ride that wave into the paradigm, into the new paradigm or new understanding. And then they help other people see it. And I really feel like that's where I go with the terminology. And it's where I would want to go, in terms of both as a follower and a leader. It's like, I don't want to just be in this for aggrandizement or any kind of claim to fame or anything like that. I would want to do it just because it's useful to the people that I care about,
Yeah.
I want to be, I want to either have my forehead touched or I want to do the touching and help everybody see better possibilities for themselves. And I think the event you described, Audrey, is a really good example of that. I wouldn't have ever thought of that. That's not something that's even in my realm of possibility. But just seeing the website, you sent us the link this morning, and just seeing the website was like an aha moment.
Yeah. So
these folks are really on the forefront of something that could be a way of doing things for years to come. And that's exciting.
Yeah. Which I think also, I think in a lot of these things, these are ways of being that are older, right? It's very, this is something that is not like a new invention, right? This is something that often, talking about maybe thought leadership, that gets squashed down by a majority or a power over a group of people. And a lot of these things that are generative and collaborative are not beneficial to Erica's point, maybe not beneficial to a particular industry or money making in a very particular way. So it is interesting to acknowledge that also, that sometimes the thought leadership is kind of a bringing back up of things that have certainly come before, but maybe have been buried underneath various forms of oppression.
Yeah.
Now, are there people that claim thought leadership that we don't have to name names here, but
just go to LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Anybody who has thought leader in there, just go to LinkedIn.
I want to go see the number of people.
Now
who
I'm like, I don't
there.
have thought leader in my title, do I? I mean, I don't think I
do. The only time, and I might get myself in trouble here, but that's all right. The only time that it's okay to have thought leader in your title is if some other entity declared you a thought leader, and you can bring the receipts, so you can show the quote or something along those lines. Otherwise, please don't put it in your title.
Well, I get kind of a chuckle out of the famous people that everyone seems to give that title to.
Yeah.
And I don't really see the leadership there. I see them just in front of people all the time saying stuff.
A cult leader is not a thought leader.
Yeah, but well, that came up last night too, didn't it? It's like we were talking about the kind of cult influence that some leaders have. But the thing that really strikes me is like, I've listened to Seth Godin for years, and everybody talks about what a thought leader he is. But all I see is that Seth Godin is a guy who can really articulate his thoughts well.
Yeah.
But there's really nothing new there.
Yeah.
It's like he's talking about the same kinds of marketing that have been happening for 150 years.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
But again, it's that idea of bringing us back to a place rather than pushing us forward to a place. It's an interesting thing. And again, I'm not dissing Seth Godin. I love the guy.
Yeah, me
I think
too.
he's wonderful, and I listen to his show every week, and I've read several of his books. But it's like, for thought leadership, I would like a higher bar.
And I think that's sort of the point, is maybe we don't need to pursue thought leadership.
Yeah.
Maybe that's not so relevant. After all, you have people like Seth Godin. I would agree. I don't consider him a thought leader. I do consider him brilliant. I do consider him thoughtful. But we don't necessarily have to go after that kind of thing, because it may not be helpful. It may not be relevant, and you can still make a huge impact without focusing on, oh my gosh, I have to come up with the next new thing. Because I think too often we put so much pressure on ourselves to be innovative and new and all of this other stuff. And that can stop you from putting out your point of view and from putting out valuable information that is based on your own experience and expertise, because you're not sure that it's good enough. Because there's this huge high bar of it being innovative and new and this big, huge idea. And some of the biggest ideas in the world are tiny.
Yeah.
I think there might be a line. We had talked about discussing influencers, and I think we're moving in that direction. It seems to me, as we're talking about this, if you are chasing the title of thought leadership, it sounds like it's in the same category as perhaps working towards fame or recognition or some other pursuit of a title, as opposed to a need for expression around something that's important to you, and not having a concern necessarily about the outcome. Doing something because you think it's right, doing something or talking about something because you think it's important. And maybe not even worrying about the really understanding that there is an impact that is possible through your expression, but perhaps holding what that is in the rest of the world lightly, because you don't know how people are going to receive your stuff. You don't know if people are going to take it and run. I think that happens a lot, where people who are true thought leaders have their ideas jacked and then repackaged by somebody else. And all of a sudden this person is the bigger name. But I think that might start us into that conversation around the concept of an influencer, which might also be very similar to that, chasing a title of a thought leader versus that being just the natural result of time spent in a very particular body of work.
Well, one of the things that I would bring up is that I love the idea that thought leadership is really just allowing yourself to think differently. It starts there. And Audrey, you're a person, first of all, that I've seen do this, and like in the midst of a conversation.
Agreed. Yes.
And what's really fun is that it's like you have this thing where it's like, stop the train, stop the bus here. I want to dive into this before we go on and make sure that something is all good. There have been a couple of times that I've seen that happen. And one of the things that I appreciate about that is that it's like that has given you a unique platform for your work.
Mm.
That way of breaking things down and saying, wait a minute, I'm not going to take the accepted lore here. I'm going to break this apart and really understand it for myself first. But then what's really cool is that then you bring it back to us, and it's all of a sudden a new way for us to see things too. Right? Yeah. Erica's nodding her head.
Yeah, because I love this too, because it's we often think of things like influencer and thought leader as having this huge audience. No, you don't need a huge audience to make a huge impact. Like I agree with everything Franklin is saying. Just like reading your LinkedIn post, reading the things that you write, having conversations with you where you do break that kind of stuff down. If you think deeply about your area of expertise, which Audrey, you do, when you share that thinking, it makes other people think more deeply about that same thing. And I often say, like, anybody who breaks my brain, and Audrey, you often break my brain. Like, I love people who break my brain because you force me to look at things in such a different way. And the work you do with somatic, like body stuff, I'm like, I don't understand any of this. And then I'm like, oh, like maybe I don't need to be here in my brain. Maybe I just need to feel it and let Audrey be the brain, because then she can explain the whole thing to me. And I'm like, wow, that's just so cool.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So we all love you, Audrey.
Thank you. I'm letting that all in, and just letting that land for a second, because it is difficult to hear those things sometimes and actually be like, yeah, that was unexpected and deeply appreciated. And thank you for that observation. It's making me a little choked up. And I think this to me speaks to why chasing thought leadership is a false path, because it takes you away from connection. And I think that's the thing when we first started talking about this, the thing that was occurring to me was the concept of depth or shallowness, like a certain amount of depth. Yeah. And I think in order for an idea to land, there has to be a certain amount of depth in the production of it and of this expression of it. And I think that there has to be a certain amount of depth and relationship between you and the person that is receiving it. Mm-hmm. There has to be some level of trust. There has to be some level of cognitive understanding, but then also just receiving and willingness of an idea.
Yeah.
I think that's also what Erica was talking about, where a lot of people who are, if you're coming up with something that is so far out of somebody's understanding that it kind of shocks their system, the instant reaction is going to be rejection or defensiveness or some sort of protective mechanism. So it makes sense that something that is new and novel, our system sometimes like new and novel. That's exciting for our system. We're like, ooh, I chew on this, right? This is really exciting to me. Sometimes new and novel is actually very scary.
Yeah.
So it is a really, I think that was, again, thank you for that observation. Really helpful for me. And I think being with each of you and the way that you move through the world, the way that you express yourself, the way that you are unafraid of talking about your ideas and expressing your ideas, because if you don't express it, if people are not there to receive it, then the impact is less than it would be otherwise. Mm-hmm. So I think being able to be impacted by each of you. I mean, when I was like, we need to have a conversation. I think that's literally was part of the threat. I was like, Erica and Franklin and I need to have a conversation, because I feel a certain amount of resonance with the way that we think and are open and how our ideas bounce off of each other, that something new can be created and expressed. which is very ecosystem. And
Yeah, right.
yeah.
Yeah. And that's the beauty of sort of the ripple effect. We don't know how big an impact we're actually having because we see the first little tiny circle.
Yeah.
But then it just ripples out and ripples out and ripples out. And it impacts us in ways that we don't always know. And sometimes it can be hard to trace the lineage to what it is. But, you know, something that I was saying about Franklin the other day, just the way your style and voice is this calming, soothing, very grounding for me. Like I am much more grounded because I am on this call with you. Yeah. So my Kermit the Frog arms are like a little subdued. And I'm here to say, like, I love my Kermit the Frog arms because that's a part of who I am. But I am able to just really sink into myself. And Audrey, you have a very similar effect in a very different way. And that ripple, when we interact with folks and it helps us see, oh, here's a different way that I might choose to show up, is incredibly powerful.
Yeah, a whole new path starts, right?
I have a question. So, all right. So as we're talking, I just gave myself the mustache.
I know, that's why I was like,
this is very energizing for me. So I have a lot of energy towards this and I have a lot of questions. So we have influence over each other's nervous systems in person and virtually. This is something that has been studied. This has been something that's understood. This is, we impact each other. This is not some woo-woo thing. This is literally studied. It's science, it's the body, it's people. And I have a curiosity, Erica, if that is transferable via written communication.
Oh, so I am so heavily biased towards written communication. Personally, I would say yes, provided that you are also a deep reader. So if you're a surface reader, you're just going to get the surface stuff. But if you are a deep reader, and how do I define that? Basically, what I mean by being a deep reader, I am a monster. I write in books. I circle words. I like jot down little ideas that come to me. That's part of being a deep reader because it's part of using the material and interacting with it in such a way that I start to shape my own ideas. And different writers, you know, depending on what you love, there are some poets in this world. Oh my God. And they just kill me in the most beautiful way because it can feel so yes, I would say yes, it's absolutely possible. It's not very common on the interwebs. There's a lot of trash out there. There's a lot of stuff that's really designed for SEO and may not go much deeper than that. But I love that question because I think that the answer is yes. It's another way that the energy of the writer is in their writing. And that's part of what creates their voice, which is this amorphous thing that I've never really been able to define well, but it's that thing that makes it uniquely theirs.
Well, what's really funny, Audrey, when you brought up your question, the first thing that popped into my mind was the fungal network in the forest.
Yeah, me too.
It was like that image just popped because it was like, yeah, well, that makes sense. I didn't mean to interrupt, but go right ahead.
No, well, the next, as Erica was finishing up, the next question was popping up in my mind, and you know, Franklin's thing is your own best company, and I wonder if working primarily by yourself or spending a lot of time in solitary, which I think all three of us have some experience with, but I mean, Franklin, that's kind of Franklin's exploration, right? It makes me curious about exploring these ideas sort of in your own space and then kind of bringing them out and testing them and kind of seeing how they land and coming back in. I'm curious if that's a process you think about, or maybe it's just innate for you at this point.
It is a process that I don't know that I think about it, but it is a process that I am aware of.
Mm.
And I always tell people, it's like your own best company doesn't mean that you are a hermit, that that you live in solitude and silence all the time. That's not the point. Your own best company is that that working alone has features and benefits that certain people find over working with other people. And I have a really difficult time working in a team context. And I think part of it is I think differently than a lot of the folks in the room. And I get impatient because my mind is going 100 miles an hour toward the new idea, and everybody else is still, shaking off the old way of doing things. And it's like, oh my God, I just don't have, I don't have it to stay here and watch you suffer through this.
Oh, I love that explanation. I love that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the other part of it for me is going back to your question. For me, writing isn't the way that I feel connected with people. It's speaking. But it's still word based, and it's still very much communication based. But I've done a lot of work and a lot of thinking about, particularly in the context of marketing, how each one of us kind of has our own unique modality of working, and it includes our strongest communication skills. It includes our preferences for arena. It includes also what I call the influence role that we're naturally inclined toward. Everyone has a style of influence that's uniquely theirs, that they've just basically grown with throughout their life. They have a way of influencing other people that's natural to them. And so one of the things that I do a lot of work with people on is finding those things and understanding them together to be your best way of presenting your ideas, your products, your services to the world. And so what's really interesting is I've tried to do things like newsletters, and I was a blogger for a few years, and I really struggled to write my ideas. But if you sat me down with a microphone, I could tell you what they were like for an hour. And that's when podcasting became a thing. But I do feel like that there is, many years ago, I think in one of our conversations, Audrey, I mentioned the book, The Space Between Us by Ruth Ellen Josselson.
Yes.
And one of the things that she was talking about are the different types of connections that we have with each other. And what happened when I read that book is all of a sudden this shared space that we have came alive for me, and I was able to see the space as a living thing as well. That was, it reminds me of C.S. Lewis's definition of the Holy Spirit, or his understanding of the Holy Spirit, where he talked about that the Holy Spirit was actually the being that is the relationship between the two others in the Trinity, right? And I always loved that, because it's like the spirit that we have together is a being of its own. And I really love that concept, because all of a sudden now communication is happening in a much more lively and rich environment, a place that's got so much potential and possibility, and it becomes much more alive.
God, I love this conversation. I like, because even whether you're speaking or writing, however you're communicating, it comes back to that you're thinking, and you're thinking deeply, and you're thinking through the thing. And it's that joy of learning and discovery and cracking the nuts and whatever kind of gets you there. In writing, we often talk about, you write the first draft with the door closed. So That's where you put everything out there. That's where all of the darlings show up. That's where like all of your half-baked ideas show up. That's where the point that, the little rant or rave shows up. That's where all of the stuff shows up that's not suitable for public consumption. We all have different levels of what's suitable and not. And then the second draft is you write with the door open. And that's when you're really thinking about your audience and what they need and how you can meet them where they are. And then for me, it's always then you share things, and suddenly anytime you share your ideas, when people give you feedback on it or add to it, I can't even say how many times I'll be like, yep, I have thought through this and I know this like the back of my hand. And then somebody's like, well, what about this? And I'm like, huh.
That's when Audrey comes in.
Never thought, right? Never thought of that. And suddenly you have this whole, you thought you went really deep, and you did, but now there's this whole other layer that has been unearthed that lets you dive deeper and deeper into it. And that is just magic. If we tied my hands, I don't think I could ever speak again.
We wouldn't want you to tie your hands.
No, listen, this is one of those things when we talk about expression, this is actually a funny thing to talk about is, so I am, if you're not seeing the video of this, I'm standing at my desk. I have a standing desk. And I realized that I do best when I express best actually when I'm standing. Sitting is a certain embodiment, but for me, I feel best in my body and I have most access to my brain often when I'm standing and I have freedom to move around. I usually have something in my hand because I'm usually playing with something. I'm fidgeting just helped me stay present actually. So, and I think that what I'm loving about where we're ending up with this is I think it's important to know what we orient towards as opposed to what we orient away from. And, when it comes to people who maybe are coming to this, wondering about this thought leadership thing. And I think where we're ending up is a completely different place. We're not like hating on thought leadership or saying you should, if you're trying to be a thought leader, then you're a terrible person. That's not where this conversation is going. I think some of the stuff that I'm taking away from this is the intention towards deepening an understanding or perhaps deepening a relationship through an expression, or an understanding that when you express something that you really feel big things about, that it can also be received in a very, I'll put poor in quotes, poor way. People may have a hard time hearing it. So I think it is important that when you are putting things out, when you are expressing new ideas, that you do have people in your circle that are going to back you. And I think that's the other thing about people who, in my experience, this may be different for others, but I need people who are in my corner and are not going to drop me if all of a sudden there's a backlash in some way. People that know that I'm working from integrity and will also give me feedback if they're like, no, listen, that was a big misstep on your part, right? But I'd like to try to run things. If it's going to be something big and scary, I don't know necessarily that I have a good example of that, but I like to have the backing of people I trust around certain ideas, especially if it's something new and scary and unusual. For me, I need a village to have my back because the outer world, especially if you're putting things out into the internet, people are very free with their opinions. And we know what people say about opinions.
Yes, we do.
Similar to assumptions, right?
Exactly. Similar body parts,
Well, kind of piggybacking on what you were just saying there, Audrey, there are a couple of things that I wanted to mention. And it feels like one of the things that we've all kind of expressed here is just the desire to put the thinking back into thought leadership and to let thought leadership not be the thing, but let the thinking be the thing. Mm-hmm. And I really feel like that there are a couple of things that come up for me around that. And one of them is that this format for the podcast is something that I've wanted to do for a while. And it's interesting that, Audrey, I think you were the one that inspired it, in that after our conversations, I was just like, pop, 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 pop. And I wanted to keep going, and I wanted to get deeper with it. And one of the things that I've found is that with the interview style that I have, I can go to a certain level, but there's a part of me that wants to go deeper in the conversation. And so that's one of the reasons that I'm kind of switching up the format here and looking for people like you all, that we can take the conversation very deep, and we can explore it as many angles as we can fit in the time that we've got. Because that to me is where the real satisfaction is.
Yeah. Thanks for being open to it.
Yeah, that is the beauty, is just seeing how you feed off of each other, and again saying something, and then Audrey takes it in a completely different but very much related direction. Is like, ooh, that's a new perspective to build into this. And it's rich and deep and gorgeous.
The other thing that I really appreciated too, Erica, was your metaphor of the ripples. Because I really feel like that is something that is important here. It's like this conversation just happened because we wanted to talk to each other, but who knows what the ramifications and implications and impact are going to be.
Yeah.
And it could be that, 50 years from now, somebody finds this on YouTube randomly because I actually put in the right keyword, and all of a sudden their life is affected by what's been said here.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that I find exciting.
One quick thing I want to say about that too, for those of you, especially who are listening, that are business owners, there are so many people who will see and hear and read what you express and will say nothing.
Yeah.
There are lurkers 100%. Out there who are reading your post every single time, will say absolutely nothing, but will love, and their lives will be impacted by what you say. So again, to get off the track of followers and likes and that sort of thing. And that's one of the hardest things about this, is your expression could seem like it's being tossed into an ocean of nothingness, but you have no idea who is reading that on a regular basis and the impact that could be making for them.
Yes, yes, yes. And if I can add something to that quickly, because we know this to be true, if you have folks in your circle and you want to give them a little reminder that what they are doing matters, send them an email, put a comment in there, say something to them, because it can get very, very lonely. And
yes,
when I have friends who will respond to one of my email newsletters, I'm just like, yay. So being able to just, you can send them a DM, you can text them, you can call them, you can email, like whatever, send a smoke signal. I don't care. Get it out there. But it just re-energizes. And the more we can support one another, the easier this entire journey becomes.
Absolutely.
Go team.
Yeah.
I think that's a good place to end our discussion. But before we go, Erica, tell people where they can find you.
Catchlinecommunications.com is my website, and I am all over LinkedIn, and it is my only social media platform. So look me up.
Well worth following on LinkedIn as well. Wonderful discussions happen on Erica's posts. And same goes for Audrey. Audrey is also an active poster on LinkedIn, and some really brilliant things go back and forth there. So where do people find you, Audrey?
Same. Come find me on LinkedIn. I'm spending my time there. There's some really good discussions going on there. And if people are interested in diving into the perfectionist stuff that I talk about, if they go to my website, fortitudeandflow.com/perfectionist, they can learn about the archetypes and learn more about the work that I do with people one-on-one and within organizations.
Excellent. Everybody who's watching or listening to this already knows how to find me, so I'll see you tomorrow. This has been so much fun, and I can't wait for our next time.
Thank you so much for having us, Franklin.
This was great, Franklin. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to Your Own Best Company.
If you enjoyed the show, would you do me a favor and subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast host? If you really love it, leave me a review or share it with your circles. If you feel like your career is reaching a dead end, or you're feeling a deep sense of dissatisfaction in your work right now, I help people discover their gifts and then find or create new opportunities that are the best fit for their talent, experience, and lifestyle. Email me at coaching@franklintaggart.com for more information. I also help people start, finish, and launch creative projects, and I offer an ongoing marketing mastermind for solopreneurs and freelancers. More information on these programs and services can be found at franklintaggart.com. Thanks again for spending this time with me.